So hello again. This is Brendan Vanis, the technical rep for PlayFab. I'm here with Tom Robbins, our Director of Marketing, and he's going to be presenting part 2 of the Live Game Ops Academy today on monetization. Tom?
Thank you, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. Technically, I guess this is the third. We did our last session, I think it was last week, and unfortunately we had a technical difficulty. The good news is, for those of you that have attended, you will still get credit to receive the Live Game Ops 101 certificate. For those of you who didn't attend but would love to, we're actually going to be redoing it so that we can actually get a good recording and put it out. And that's scheduled for October 27th at 10 a.m. So you can actually get to it using the bit.ly below, PlayFab UE, and that'll take you to the registration page. So once again, I apologize for the wonders of technology issues that we had for our last. But the good news is that we've gotten a lot of requests. We're going to make all 3 of the videos available, and we're also going to provide a quick quiz that everyone can take and still get the Game Ops 101 certificate by email. So we should have an announcement for that during our next session on October 27th. So let's actually kind of hop into things a little bit. In this session, we're going to talk about monetization, and it's kind of funny, you know, monetization is kind of the toughest challenge, I think, facing everybody out there today. Really, it's such a huge topic, and we can really only cover so much. And as I was researching this and talking to various people, it just became amazing to me, kind of the amount of content and the amount of things that we have to cover. But one of the biggest takeaways, I think, is really the fact that that's fine. Yeah, one of the takeaways is simply focusing on your users. So when you're thinking about monetization, really focus on your users. So this includes building monetization models that actually make sense, focusing on key metrics, looking at customer segmentation, understanding the why and the how, and then lastly, understanding the use cases. So this is things like what's driving your acquisition, what's driving your retention. A well-designed game monetization strategy feels like part of the original game design, and this is really where a lot of people fall down. It doesn't feel like a last-minute add-on. It becomes very organic in nature, and it enhances the gameplay, and it adds things like depth and variety and freedom, and it really doesn't punish players who choose not to pay, right? Because especially if you're looking at things like free-to-play, you want to avoid this idea of punishing players. And unless that's actually what you're after, I don't always recommend that, but I know of several games that actually do that. It is important to keep in mind, right, that players have little opportunity costs in downloading a free game today, and that's one of the biggest things that we need to keep in mind. While we can do acquisition, while we can, you know, pay to get people to download, people can download it easily. If there's friction in the game, or if there's some part of the game that doesn't work for them, they're certainly not going to monetize. But I don't know about you, I'd rather have somebody playing my game than not playing my game and having deleted it. We want to be careful to make sure that we don't disrupt kind of the fragile bond of engagement that we build as we start having people play our game. So the holy grail of monetization, and this is kind of an entire webinar on its own, is the idea of customer lifetime value. So I'm not going to cover a ton around it today, as we are looking at kind of creating a whole webinar just on its own around how you define it. But when you think about customer lifetime value within marketing, it really is the prediction of the net profit that's attributed to the entire future relationship with the customer. So the prediction models can vary widely based on the level of sophistication, the amount of data, kind of, you know, the accuracy and what you're actually looking for. but it is an important concept because it encourages you to shift away from the idea of focusing on short-term profits to the long-term health of customer relationships. It's an important number because it also represents the upper limit of spending that you should do to acquire new customers. So for example, if your customer lifetime value is, you know, 30 bucks and you're acquiring customers at 35 or 40, clearly you've got a problem and that you need to look at how you're going to solve that. Because of this, it's really important to kind of keep in mind as you're calculating things like payback from your advertisers. It's also important to think about things beyond monetization when you really are looking at customer lifetime value. I know we're focusing on that for this webinar, but keep in mind there's a lot of other levers that are part of this and that really are hard to quantify. So for example, things like loyalty, customers, loyalty, community feedback is another one. So we actually work with studios here at PlayFab who build loyalty to the studio. So if the studio releases new games, people will immediately want to go and look at the game. That is a huge value when you think about it because you get this built-in audience that's out there. Also, this idea of community. You know, there's a lot of marketing studies that talk about the fact that me recommending you or me saying nice things or me participating in the community will have a viral impact. So these are the kinds of things that really go beyond what I always refer to as the standard customer lifetime value. So you do want to kind of keep those in mind as you're building things out and trying to figure out kind of what this customer lifetime value model will look like in your monetization strategy. So let's hop into the idea of how you're going to design your economy. So there are a bunch of standard ways of doing it. I don't think there's anything kind of new here. There's some things we talk about later about how you can build out, you know, paywalls and some of the others. But at a very simple standard, right? Premium, you know, I'm going to pay up front. I get all my content. Freemium, I'm going to pay a small sample for free, and then I can purchase the rest of the game. Free to play, where the full game is free, and this is typically where you're going to do things like use in-app purchases, you know, as well as providing mandatory or optional ad views as a way to help generate revenue. And then last is subscription, pay a reoccurring fee. There's kind of the standard game design things that we need to think about as we're building our games. And these become important. If you remember earlier, I said that monetization is a natural part of playing the game. So what that really means is that you need to think about that up front as you're actually doing your initial design and your initial build out of your economy. So while I was actually doing some research and talking to people, I ran across this comic that actually just kind of cracked me up when I looked at it. Because I don't actually play League of Legends, but I have a 12-year-old son that does. And what was interesting is, you know, this idea of the freemium model and the fact that when you think about it, you know, you can generate a bunch of revenue around it. So, in looking at it, as my 12-year-old son explains it to me, so for example, League of Legends has two currency systems. What they call influence points, which are earned by playing the game, and riot points, which can be bought with cash. And riot points can also do things like give you access to champions, which you know, XP boosts, you know, rune pages, skins for champions, and then basically when you look at how they're building it out, it's been a very successful game from what we can see on the outside. Part of the thing to keep in mind is when you're building your models, there's always people who will say that there are other ways to do it. So, you know, League of Legends is an incredibly you know, popular game. I actually ran across somebody who talked about it in a different light, which I thought was kind of funny. So they said, as of 2013, League of Legends has earned 70 million registrations since 2009. They average about 32 million MAU, monthly active users, 12 million DAU. They have about $1.32 ARPU and about 624 million in revenues. So the average revenue per paying users on popular games is about $35. If you crunch all of these numbers about League of Legends, you get about 1.2 million playing users or a 3.75 conversion rates. That's pretty remarkably poor as rates go, which is kind of funny, right? Because whatever model you come up with, I think there'll be people who say you can do it differently, but you do want to kind of keep in mind, you know, an example like this. So, building your plan, and that's kind of the next step. When you think about how you're going to monetize, I always recommend model everything out. And the model itself should contain a couple of different things. One is how long to consume content. So there's a bunch of things. I always recommend 60 days minimum for non-payers, and that'll get people in. But you do want to think about this as a product roadmap, right? So if you have 60 days at launch, you need to immediately have additional content available right, you know, shortly after. You also need to think about the model earnings per session, right? How you're going to do things like currency and experience points. And then you want to think about modeling per session. How are people going to pay? When do you expect them to pay? You know, things like pinch points are a big example, right? Of at what point do you actually throw something pretty heavy at the user and you expect it might take them, you know, 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 tries to get through something? And then are you going to offer them, you know, additional ways to get out of it, and what's the cost? The other is you want to think about the cost to complete. And this is a simple Excel spreadsheet or a very complex financial calculation depending on what you want to do. But basically you want to think about how you're going to target the revenue, how you're going to roll out content, and then what kind of discounts you may want to offer. So for example, if you go very deep, you can offer that for premium items, and that actually can take reluctant non-spenders and turn them into purchasers. And I often think about that of, you know, if I really enjoy the game and I want to buy a bag of gems, what does that look like? And maybe if I've gone through several levels and I understand the segment as the game maker, then I can look at and say, well, why don't I offer them a pretty discounted package to get them in? And this is a way of kind of growing it out. But I do recommend that you build your plan and then you keep an eye on your plan. So part of that is look at your plan, see how you're doing against it, and then if you need to, go ahead and make changes to it, right? It is a plan, and it is something that you can change. So when you think about metrics, and this is kind of a whole discussion on its own, I think about it in the ARM cycle. So you look at your audience, which are things like your active users, your monthly users, your acquisition, which is your cost per acquisition or CPA, your ROI on campaigns, your retention, so things like stickiness, how many people are returning, retention rate, and then monetization. These are great indicators of what you're going to do or how you're going to look at your game and how it's going to be successful or not successful as a way of kind of driving along people in purchasing. Now, these aren't the only things that you should be looking at, but the reality is this is a kind of great way to start, and something that I would definitely recommend that you look at is having kind of the minimal amount. And a lot of times this is where we start. And even as a small indie studio, you probably don't have just a data person who can look at all of these things, but you do have people who can just monitor kind of some of the standard things that are out there. All right, so kind of interesting. You know, when you look at how you're actually going to sell virtual currency, there's a couple of theories, and it's honestly not a hugely well-guarded secret. And for game developers out there, I always kind of recommend that you do some research. There's three basic theories, and I'm sure that there's a lot more, and I'd certainly love to hear if people have more around how you're going to sell virtual currency. And kind of the idea is that if all three of these come together, that you're going to have someone who will spend. But there are ways to think about your game design, your economy design, and the way you're going to move people through. So the first is the idea of flow theory. It's all about maximizing the amount of time a gamer spends in the game. And this is accomplished by getting a gamer in a state of mind where they're going to perform tasks and they're going to enjoy it. So they're kind of in the zone. You know how you might be gardening or playing basketball and you're in the zone and you're having fun around it. The interesting part of this is that there's some discussions around, how you can do this, and when you get people in the flow, it becomes very natural for them to feel like, well, I'm moving through the game, I'm enjoying what I'm doing, oh look, I can get more enjoyment by purchasing something. And this also comes in the idea of like the peak end rule that we've talked about before, which is the idea of when do you ask people to purchase? Well, obviously, you don't ask people to purchase, after they've just spent 5 levels getting beaten by the boss and they haven't gotten anywhere. You look at points of delight and then you try to get them to buy it. The other is intermediate currency, kind of the second theory. And that's by introducing an intermediate currency that isn't associated to real world currencies. And really what that does is it makes the consumer much less adept at assessing the value of a transaction. So for those of you who maybe go to Vegas, a couple of years ago, Vegas moved away from real money and they moved to cards, right? And we went a couple of months ago and it was fantastic. You give them the card and you just keep putting money in the machine and the cards and you get to keep playing. So you don't really see what's out there. Now, obviously with this idea of intermediate currency, really what you're doing is you're making it easier for people to spend. You're reducing the amount of friction that's out there. And then the last is dynamic pricing. In this one, you typically trigger carefully timed elements to offer pricing to gamers. And this creates the illusion of getting a better deal by spending money at control times in the game. So we talked earlier about the idea of pinch points and maybe offering timed things for people that are there. And this gets into also understanding your gamer segments. So I have talked to people, and part of what they'll do is they'll model out, for example, they expect the first purchase to be made in level 3 when they have to go against a really big bad enemy, and they offer some additional tools to help people get past it. But what they actually find is that it might be an earlier element and that they need to redo their model, and they can offer some dynamic pricing within that. So for example, if I did make it past 2 or 3 times, maybe you offer me a discount. So these are kind of standard theories that are out there, and the goal is to obviously understand your game and to really look at ways that you can get people to spend money and monetize to get at the virtual goods that they want, kind of across the entire game. So next, I want to spend some time looking at some simple best practices that I've seen as a way of making it easier for people to get at your items. First is your store design. Kind of an interesting and kind of often when I look at a lot of people that we work with, kind of things that I always recommend they look at, and I know often as we're building things we don't always think about it, right? From a store design, a layout, make it as simple as possible. There's nothing more frustrating than going to buy something and not being able to find it. Try to think about using full screen for items, right? It makes it much more interesting. encourage scrolling, and this is kind of one of the interesting things that I've seen some studies around, which really looks at, if you go to, we had one game that I worked with who was very interested in keeping the store design very, very simple. And really what they did is they kind of kept it down to one page, and they found obviously that there were a bunch of problems. One is, looked like they didn't have anything. Even though that they were doing things, behind the scenes to generate items and some of the others. The second is people perceived that there wasn't a lot of value in what was there. And these are things that obviously, including things like promos, special player, or new sections to drive payers out. These are all things that make a lot of sense. Also, as you roll things out into the store, calling them out as new or best value. And if you offer, for example, a lot of bags of gold, so you get like one gold coin, a bag of gold, or a truckload of gold, also helping people understand what the best value is within that, because generally people are looking for a deal. Even in games, we're trying to think through what those deals would actually look like. All about minimizing friction, and I think that's something that I always talk to when we're dealing with a lot of our studios, that I always like to think about, right? How do I minimize friction? Deep linking to relevant items, easily enabling purchase of things like consumables. It should be very simple for people to get what they want to purchase, right? If I have an energy-based game and my energy is getting low, I shouldn't have to go, oh yeah, maybe I'll go to the store and buy something. You want to provide that, but you also want to make sure that you're not overpowering what's there as you start to build out your interface. So transaction pages, and this is always something that I often like to think about a lot. So when you think about setting the right price for your product, and it's hard, right? Because what you want to do is figure out how much people are willing to pay versus what you want to sell it for. And one of the ways that you can do this is using something called price elasticity, and this is a standard economic principle that's out there that it was funny, when I was building this out, I started looking at one of my old textbooks, and I realized that it really is the same. The idea behind price elasticity is most people would say that customers and market are sensitive to the price of a product or service, and the general assumption is that people will buy a product or service if it's cheaper, and less will buy it if the price is more. Really, price elasticity allows you to quantify that a little bit more. So for example, a real world example is something like beef or hamburger, right? When the price dramatically increases, demand may go down, but people can easily substitute something else. So you think about that in terms of your game. So if you drastically increase a price, you could then allow people to purchase others or enable them to purchase other things, which also gives you the ability to think about other options for purchase and other ways that people might get through the gameplay. So maybe you drive up, or you change the cost of one kind of ammunition, and then people can replace that with another, and you can kind of see what's there. There are basically a couple of what they call zones of elasticity that I thought were interesting, and something that you want to keep in mind. So perfectly elastic, which is any small change in price results in a very large change in the quantity demanded. And these are products that are mostly pure commodities. Relatively elastic, change in price causes large change in commodity. So this is kind of the idea of meat, as I discussed above. Unit elastic, where any change is matched by an equal change in quantity. Relatively inelastic, where a large change causes a small change in demand. So gasoline is an example. Even though the price may go up, it doesn't necessarily change the demand that much. Also, you can think about how you're going to bring that into your own game, and then things like perfectly inelastic, where the quantity demanded does not change when the price changes. So these are all things that you can think about as you're building out kind of your transactions and ways of getting at it. Certainly these are techniques that when you're modeling out your monetization that you can start to think through and kind of drive a lot of those value in. Things like real money. Listen, we've all got friction. Is the bane of any marketing program, whether it's in a game or whether it's in B2B. Anything we can do to reduce friction becomes incredibly important, and this is where things like real money transactions come into play. But you do want to have those as entry points. So for example, you might think through things like premium currency, content features or unlocks, bundles or packages. So things that you may not necessarily sell a lot or can be used to purchase other things. So these are points of friction that you do want to think through. Virtual currency is obviously where we're going to go for all of this, right? The idea that you can always use virtual currency for payment. You can use things like granular pricing. You can discount it because at the end of the day, you know that I paid $5 and I've got so many gold coins in the game, and you can kind of maintain that currency model and kind of understand what's going on in your game. So those are all things that are pretty standard. I think anyone out there dealing with monetization would kind of fully understand. One of the things that's often not used a lot that I always recommend is the idea of impulse buys. These are things that will allow you to surface a one-touch purchase, at a specific pinch point. And this allows the person to understand immediate value, an immediate thing that they might need, and it also can also enable them to feel like they're losing something, right? So, the impulse buy is kind of the classic thing. If we've all been in, a store and we go through a line, and you have a kid, they look at it and they want the gum, they want, this, they want that. If you're in, a Home Depot, they've got, like screwdrivers or all the things that are just impulse buys that you're going to throw into the cart. When we think about monetizing our own game, we should think about the same thing, right? When I go through there, I am worried about losing something because there's a fantastic deal on, a screwdriver that I really wanted, but it's such a great deal, so I throw it in the cart. Why not take that and pull it into the game? But you do want to balance this with what I would call major pinch points in the game. So the idea that the person doesn't feel like they have to buy something to get through a level. So the idea that they're paying something, to get through. It should be about enabling them or helping them. A common example is time extensions, right? So the idea that maybe you're going to get an extra 10 seconds to do something, or some games I've seen you can get where you can only play for 30 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day. It'll give me a time extension. And that's an easy enough to do. Hey, I see that you're really enjoying this. Would you like to purchase another, 15 minutes or 20 minutes? So these are all examples which are really about the idea of bringing up offers. And these are things that are incredibly important. And when you think about offers, I always think about segments. And let's take a second to talk about segments. One of the things is often said to be a relatively big fish in a small pond than a small pond and a big fish. And the way that you can achieve this in marketing is that you actually shrink your target market. So rather than say everyone 25 to 30 is a target for my game, you can think about specializing on a specific segment. And really what this does, it allows you to understand kind of the needs and desires of everything that's out there. And this becomes incredibly important. So Segments are about a couple of different things. So they're about being different, so it allows you to kind of pull down the amount of customers that are out there. They're relevant, so I want all people, you know, who've gone through maybe level 1, level 3, and level 5, because those are the major levels in our game. They're significant, right? Because we know that once someone finishes level 5, that they're more likely to continue on to level 10 or level 20. And then they're also accessible, and they have a suitable size. So, you know, clearly, as you know, marketers in a game, or just generally people doing games, we want as big a market as we can get. The reality is, when we're serving up offers, we want to make sure that the offer is relevant. And I always tell people, you know, think about relevant segments and making offers to those segments. And if those segments aren't big enough, then you really need to kind of fine-tune what's there and make it easier for people that, you know, to get into those segments. This is also about varying timing, so being able to understand what's going on. Some other purchase best practices that are there, so things like speed ups, you know, and thinking about how you're going to go ahead and grow those, and also things like energy. If you have an energy-based game, it's a great purchase offer that you can make. So the idea of being able to slow down the content consumption. So you do want to be careful here that you're not making it seem like they have to purchase it. One of the other kind of tricks I always recommend, or things to think about when you're building out these kind of things, is think about push notification, right? Because the idea is, if I can only play so much and then I have to go while my, you know, tank gets more energy, or, you know, my fortress builds or something like that, you want to make sure that you're notifying the people that, hey, it's time, come back and play. And there are some very well-known games out there that are actually really good at that. And you want to balance that, obviously, between forcing people or being, you know, kind of an over notifier, as I call it. Things like durables are great offers to make up. You know, in-game items that the user retains permanently. You know, clearly you can use things like decorative items, but I always try to think outside of that and think other ways for doing it. You do want to be careful as you think about these items. So overpowering people, or allowing them to purchase things that are overpowered, really kind of reduces their interest in purchasing stuff later, because they say, well, I purchased it and it took me a really long time to use it, or I didn't get the value out of it. You know, these are also things to be careful of. Consumables is another area to think through. Obviously, these are items with a finite number of uses. It's kind of interesting. I always think through multiple levels of consumables, which also allows you to break into the segments and think through where people are in their level or their expertise, and kind of what things they want to do. The other is a very common thing that I always like, is the idea of giving samples out, right? So part of what happens is, you get through a game, and I've played a game, I get up to a certain level, and it says, hey, you really should buy this new consumable. And you look at it and you're like, okay, I don't know what that thing is, and I certainly don't understand the value of it. If I were to do things like get one of them and try it out, and I can see, oh, well, this helps me do X, or it really makes it easier to do something else, it really makes it easier for me to purchase things as I move forward. Some other things to look at are obviously things like unlocks, you know, ways to get at, you know, level gated items, you know, map progress or content packs. And these are multiple ways of getting at them, but you do want to think about some of the offers as the monetization and how you can drive these out. One of the things to keep in mind, especially with unlocks, is when you unlock something, you want to make it expensive enough that people will want to pay for it, but you want to also make sure that when they get into that, it's prohibitively expensive for skipping everything, right? Because they could get a specific quest, they go off on the quest, and then they come back and they have even more power. But if people pay to get through the quest, they're obviously not playing the gameplay, and they're sticking, or they're kind of going beyond what they need to. So these are all things that you want to think about as part of your monetization strategy that's there. Also, things like chance mechanics. And I think everyone listening probably understands the basics of these. And these are just basically ways of delivering repeat purchases. It also gives you an opportunity to disguise rare item pricing. So if there's some major sword or some major gun that they can get, when you look at chance mechanics, you can create the spins that are, or create the opportunity that's there. One of the other things on your game is offering what I call the daily spin. So, when I get in or as I'm leaving, there's a daily spin which allows me to maybe get something or look at something or do something. Creates an interesting mechanic for people because they'll actually start looking forward to it. I know when I play games like that, and I've seen enough studies that when people play games like that, they start thinking through, ooh, that's kind of a nice way of doing it. And they look forward to getting that specific thing at the end of their play or before their play. So there's also some ideas of alternate monetization that I just want to spend a minute or two talking about. And these are kind of constantly coming up, and I always recommend, obviously we spend time reading a lot of things that are out there, and there's some great examples of how people are doing this. So things like offer wall or ads. One of the games that I play a lot, Adventure Capitalist, offers this idea of watching a video to get double the profits that are there. So I've watched enough people play it, and it's fantastic, right? Because they look at it, they watch the video, and they actually look forward to getting the videos that are out there. And then the other is things like mini games. So these allow people, so for you to sell them upsell, but it also allows people to look at some of the other value that's out there and kind of provide some additional value that are there. The other is for things like mini games. They don't have to be part of the core game loop, excuse me, and you can drop them in at any time as you're building them. And there's some interesting examples of things that people are doing with mini games as they start to build things out. And clearly, as we get towards the end here, just want to spend a second as you think about kind of tools and that are there. Clearly, as you look at how you're delivering this up, you do want to think about monetization from a server-driven perspective, right? Because what happens a lot on the client is that people can hack it, they can cause issues. When you're delivering things from the server, you can actually control that and be able to make sure that people are doing the right thing and they aren't cheating within the game. So kind of a whirlwind tour of monetization that was out there. Obviously I covered a lot of different pieces. I did want to make sure that people remembered that they hopefully will sign up for our next session. And we hope to see you then. And as always, we have some additional resources that I definitely recommend. We have our live game operations ebook, which is available as a free download. We hope people will take advantage of that. We are starting to build out a live game operations resource center, and this is a combination of resources that we've built, but we've also worked with some community folks that are out there, and we've included a fair amount of resources as well. We hope actually that people listening to this will find resources that they think are interesting and send them over to us, or even resources that maybe you built that you think should be in there. So with that, what I want to do is open it up. We've got a few minutes for questions. Brendan, do we have any questions?
We've got a couple of folks who've been asking questions as the talk's been going on. The main question, though, is simply, where will they be able to get copies of these slides?
That's a great question. So we will make all of the slides available. I'll make them available via SlideShare. We'll post them up to our blog as well. And the video will be available, assuming we don't have any issues, will be available on our YouTube channel or available at playfab.com/videos. And we'll make all of those available. I'd also recommend downloading the live game operations ebook, which you can see there at the bit.ly PlayFab ebook, which is basically the beginning book that we use to build out this specific section.
Great. And thinking of technical issues, we had one person let us know that they lost audio for about 30 seconds partway through the talk. So we are going to be checking the recording, make sure that all the information's there, and we'll make sure that if there was a problem, we'll correct that. So if there are any other questions anyone has, feel free to submit them now in the web tool that you're looking at, the GoToWebinar tool, and we'll get you the info you need.
Yeah. And we certainly hope everyone's enjoyed this session. I think we're starting to see some real interest from folks on these seminars. I am working with some folks on trying to get some additional webinars set up, and we'll have kind of more information around those, I'm hoping, shortly.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions coming in. The first is, can AdMob or any other ad integration be enough for a freemium model?
So I'm not actually completely familiar. I would say, so I couldn't give a great answer. I'm not that familiar with AdMob. What I know about it is that I think it'll give you the basics. Unfortunately, I'm not fully sure. Well,
I think to specifically to how the question's phrased, I think the best answer we could give is that there are currently games in the marketplace. I'm struggling to remember one off the top of my head, but I know I have seen games that do monetization solely through advertising. So I would say if you're looking at ad integration as being your model for how you're going to do your income, yes, it is possible. It comes down to how do you want to monetize your game? What's your player profile look like for the target demographic you're going for? There's certainly some good research out there. There's some information, obviously, you'll be getting from these talks and the resources we're making available as well. But yeah, understanding your players and how they spend and what they're willing to spend on is going to be key to understanding that. Interstitial ads lately have been some of the more successful ways that games have been monetizing. The banner ads can be successful on certain models of games, but in general right now what I'm seeing largely is games using the interstitial pop-up ads, video ads, as their driver for revenue, or added revenue in some cases.
Added revenue, yeah.
Great suggestion from Rob. He said to check out what 256 did on Android and iOS. Thanks, Rob. Okay, and ads require high volume. Yes, okay, and Frank pointing out that advertising revenue can work, but that ads do require a high volume for it to really be successful, and that is very true. So going back to our previous talk, user acquisition is something that you really need to be thinking strongly about in terms of, how are you going to get players into your game in order to make your ad model successful. Thanks, Frank. I was wrong. The other couple of things in here are not questions. They are some thank you notes from folks. So thank you guys for being part of this. Thanks for your time and attendance.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. And as always, we hope that we'll see you at the next one. And with that, everyone have a great day. Thank you.